So hello everyone and welcome to my talk Power Umbraco with a bit of Azure. So in this talk I'm going to basically do a 30-minute demo from scratch. So it is either going to be like really epic and I will succeed, or you will all have like a good laugh, but at least you have popcorn. So my name is Henk Boelman. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft. I work with Azure a lot, but I specialize in AI. But I like Umbraco because I've done that for the last, now I have to think, 10, 15 years. Like Umbraco 4 was still there. So then I started. So I always kept doing it. So I always like to come back to these festivals and present something that kind of mix the two interests of me. So I have a Twitter. You can all follow me. That is always good. I have a GitHub where all the demo code that actually works will be on. So you can do it at home. And there is a blog, but then you have to be like kind of interested in AI or accessibility. So both you can find on my blog. So slide 1. This is what we're going to use to build it. So we're going to use GitHub Codespaces with a GitHub repository, with a GitHub action to wrap Umbraco 9 in a Docker container and push that to a container registry. And then we're going to deploy this infrastructure with traffic managers, Azure container instances, Azure SQL, and some storage. It's not all the components you need in the real world, but it comes close. So, and that should be done within 30 minutes. So let's get started. This is really awkward microphone. If you have to do a demo here and you have to do it like this. So excuse me if I sometimes will look at my screen. So I have a GitHub repository with a little bit of help scripts here. And from there, if you pay enough for your GitHub subscription, you have the ability to start a code space. So I have already a code space here because we don't want to see wait for like 3 to 4 minutes for a code space to set up. So actually 3 to 4 minutes is not that long for a complete development environment to set up, but sitting here and waiting 3 minutes is quite long. So the code space is starting up, and then we basically have Visual Studio in the cloud. In your GitHub repository, you can put like configuration files, and then it will also install everything in the environment you need. So now it has cloned my repository, and we can get started. So, Umbraco always needs some Azure resources before we're going to start. So let's first create a resource group in Azure and see if I still have access to it. And yes, I have my two-factor authentication with me because. So this is how GitHub Codespaces authenticates with Azure using the device login. So you log in, type your code, then hope that we have a mobile reception here. Then new passwordless login kicks in here. Bam, and it works. So now I've granted my Azure CLI that runs in my code space access to my Azure subscription with my credentials. Now it's going to wait a while and checks all the subscriptions and it's trying to make a list from that. And then it will create an Azure resource group named Umbraco together. And here we see it has created it. So the next thing we need is actually a database. So I will run it because this takes a while. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an SQL server named Umbraco together. We give the admin user, admin password, we tell which location and which resource group it has to get in. Then when we have the server, we need to create a database in it. And I'm going to use name that database Umbraco Dev. I will use a P1 database because that one is actually the fastest at the moment. And it will be deployed in the resource group because everything with Azure CLI, you always have to specify a resource group. Then next, you have to enable that Azure services can actually access that subscription. Or not that subscription, that database. So you have to enable the firewall. And in the portal, it is like a nice checkbox. But in the CLI, you have to give it a name. It has to be allow Azure services. And then you have to specify these IP addresses. And then every service, including GitHub, code spaces, has access to through the firewall to that database. And then finally, we'll print out the connection string. And so there are a lot of different choices for SQL. So you can do like a basic thing. It costs like €5 a month, and you can just develop on that. But if you want to have like a little performance and want to that the database restores fast, you probably want to use a P1 and also in production. So it has created the server with the credentials. Now it just has to create the database. And then hopefully we will have it soon. Here. You can do it. So in the meanwhile, let's take a look here in Azure and add our IP address. Here we have the server already. We can show firewall settings. We add the client IP address, and now this machine or everyone in this kind of room that shares the Wi-Fi has access to my database, and you all saw the password, so don't do anything. So now I have added that, and this will flip with the comment that they're going to with the firewall rule. In creating databases, sometimes it's really fast, and sometimes it is a little bit slower. But we will have to wait, because Umbraco doesn't really work without the database. I should have created the database before. But there's no way back. So we can look at the next step, what we have to do. The next, of course, is that we need some storage, because I'm going to run Umbraco in a container, and you don't want to store your media files in that same container. So I'm going to use blob storage to actually store it, store all the media, and use the new file system provider to actually route it. And that package worked really, really wonderful. So good. We have a database, firewall rules are added, and here is the connection string without the database name and the username and password. So next, we're going to run the script to create our bash 3. To create storage, we say create a storage account, and then we create a container. And we set the access to the container public, so everyone can see all the images there. And that will be easy, because we will put a CDN in front of that. So finally, it will create the storage account, will create the container, and then will display the connection string for us here. So that is also really easy. When you use Azure CLI, you can just say with one comment, "Oh, give me the connection string," and you don't have to go all the way through the portal and find that connection string. So next, I want to have my my website fast in like kind of everywhere in the regions or everywhere around the world. So I'll put a CDN in front of it. So what we do here is we first create a CDN profile. The word profile is a little bit weird, because basically you create the CDN configuration, and then you can start adding endpoints in that CDN. So I'm creating a profile called Umbraco Together CDN, and add one endpoint that points to the blob storage we've just created. And with an extra path, so it directly goes into the assets container we have created. So then we don't need to have the word assets, the container folder in the URL. This one is really important to set the origin host header, because if you don't set that, it will not work. It will not give you any data back. So never forget to do that. Took me only like an hour to figure out that was the problem. So it is creating the CDN profile. So what the problem is with, or the problem, it's not a real problem, CDN takes a while to provision. It takes around 5 minutes before it actually goes into the state that it is going to do something. You have a few choices. I'm used a standard Microsoft one. This is basically in all the Azure regions, but you can also have an Akamai, which is actually mostly at everyone's provider level. So they keep the data closer. It is way more expensive, but if you have like a high traffic site, that is absolutely worth it if you want to have your website fast. So mostly it works like that the request comes into the CDN, goes to your blob storage, and like then it caches it locally. So always there is like one person that will actually have it slow. Then next, let's go with installing and setting up Umbraco in the code space. We first start with set up a clean Umbraco setup. So what we do is, I have a lot of variables here above because I didn't want to type it all. So I'm trying to retrieve the connection string, so I can give that when we are creating this new project. So I do .NET New, Umbraco templates, the solution name, project name with a connection string, so that it actually puts that nicely for me in the app settings development thing here. So I don't have to type it, which is really awesome. Where were we here? And then I'm adding the storage provider Azure Blob package. So super cool. It has done that. So now we just need to do a few code changes, or not changes, add some code to actually make the CDN and the blob storage provider work. So I'll copy that and we'll paste it in the startup here. After components. And I just need to have it nicely tapped because I don't know why, but it has to be. Yeah. And we add this line of code here. And with this, Umbraco is almost able to get and use the blob storage device for the media storage. So, tap. Ctrl S. So the only thing we now have to do is add the properties to the application app settings JSON. And now we're going to the storage bit. So this you have to add to your configuration. Do I now have enough? Yeah. So we have to add it here. And we have to add it. CMS. Have to add it here. Then I made an easy script to retrieve all the credentials I have to enter there. Because with the Azure CLI, like I said, you can get the connection string and you can get all the values you need. So I say bash 03 retrieve it. So I just copy and paste the connection string. Make sure you don't have any space here because then it will give errors. The container name where I want to have it is assets, and the CDN name is this. So now we should be able to go and run Umbraco, and you can actually run things in a GitHub code space. So we can just do .NET run here to start building. And if I copy pasted everything correctly, it will actually work. Okay, so yeah, bum, bum, bum. So now you see here local host. Yeah, that's not going to work in a code space, but it automatically for us creates these ports. So I can use the I need to use the HTTP one. That is port 62 at the end. Open it, and now I can access like Umbraco that is running in my code space in the browser, which is really cool. It's connecting to the port, and this is with Umbraco. So you have to type install, otherwise it gets in a redirect loop, because it says too many redirects. And then we just type Henk, my email address, and I'm not going to use a secure password because you're all going to see it anyway. Would be nice to have like the checkbox there that you can show your password, that it doesn't display. So I never made that mistake of showing my password in a stream there. So here we go, setting up in our very fast P1 database. Then we will create like a small template, and then we have Umbraco up and running in, I think, like 10 minutes in an Azure code space. And now we can actually start developing, checking everything into GitHub. And we are using the resources in Azure. That's pretty cool. So let's first upload an image. Screenshot is fine, hopefully. Yeah, it's fine. Let's go to settings and create a document type with a template. Call it home. Doesn't have needs to have permissions to be here. Save. Then in the template, we're just going to add a little bit of code. And I hope the IDs didn't change. But we'll see, we'll just double check. 1055, that's good. So we can go here, home, create the home node. No content, we will just call it home. Save it, and we have a home page that is loading the image now from our CDN from blob storage. So here we have the Umbraco together, Azure Edge.net, and then media that goes directly in the assets folder, and then of course like the directory structure, how it is always is. And if we take a look at the template, which I scrolled over a little bit too much fast, this is how you do it. You just say mode with URL mode absolute, and there is a small bug in the code that needs to be fixed. They put a container name in, and actually they replaced the media folder with a container name, and they should not do that, so I'm undoing that here. So I'll file a bug tonight, I promise. And I will not touch that again. So here it is displaying the host name, the image, and very simple template. So step one, we have Umbraco working in our code space, and that is really cool. So now we actually want to start wrapping it up and getting it ready for production, because that is the homepage everyone wants to have. So we go back to the terminal, we stop here, and we are going to continue with creating a Docker file. Create the Docker file. Oh yeah, so we're going to copy the Docker file to the root of the West file, and then we can actually have a look what is in here. So I've made or picked like the most simple Docker file I could find, where I'm taking the Microsoft.NET SDK base image, working there source. My Umbraco installation is in source. I copy that into the container. I do a .NET restore, .NET build. Then I publish it to a folder called app. Then taking a new container, open port 80, set the work there to app, and then copy everything from this directory in. And I say the entry point is .NET run and the DLL that has to run. There are way more advanced Docker configurations what you can do, but this is like kind of the minimum that makes it actually run and build within like a reasonable amount of time. And that is what we're going to do next. We're just going to say Docker build Umbraco together, and we will call it latest. This is now building, doing the .NET restore, and it should go fast, hopefully. Always the first time takes a lot of time, and then if you don't change the enters in your Docker file, it will go faster the second time. So the next thing what we're going to do afterwards is actually run this container in the GitHub code space, which is also really cool because you can just, before you publish it to an ACR and do all those other things, you can actually just run it here from the command line. And that is pretty handy. And .NET Restore should be done at least within a few seconds, hopefully. And then when we're done with the container, we're going to create an Azure Container Registry where we're going to push it to later on. So this is almost done. Build 6 of 6, copying it to the other container. Now it is here, and now we can actually run it. It already detected that there is something with port 80, and we should be seeing our extremely cool homepage in a few seconds. And there we are, and we see that the hostname changed to the Docker container instance name. Still coming from the CDN and connecting to the same database. So now that we have the Docker container, we can actually start pushing it to an Azure Container Registry. Let's first create one. Azure Container Registry. So what we do here is we create an Azure Container Registry. That is where we can push our containers to. The two things I always do is, or one thing actually, is enable the admin mode. Then you get like a username and password you can log in. So you don't have to use like the Microsoft authentication on it or the Azure authentication. And then you can ask for the credentials and you can log in. And now when you have this, you can access the Azure Container Registry without logging in on this device. So we can now actually start pushing our container. Let's call it number 5 today. So we're now pushing it from there to our container registry. And then we should be able to see our resources here. Here is our container registry. And here are our repositories. Here we have Umbraco together. And here is our ones we just pushed with the tag 005. There are a lot of details about it. And this is how everyone can pull it in. But running it is not like just saying docker run and then this image, because it needs all kind of connection strings and all those kind of type of things. So I skipped over that when I just run it very quickly. So when you actually run that container, you need to give it environment variables. So if you run it on the command line, you can use we say dubbele punt in Dutch. So those things, dubbele punten. But if you use like an ACR or some other Azure resources, you need to replace those ones with 2 underscores. But if you run it with a Docker command line, this works. So now we can actually run the container from the ACR. No, it is already there. 3. And here it is now, the image that is in the ACR. And we will have the perfectly nice homepage again in a bit. So what I did here with ACR is I rebuilt the Docker container, but now I tagged it as with the repository name or the ACR name, Umbraco together.azure.io, and then the name of the repository, and then my tag name. In this case, 5. So this is all really nice, but nobody is going to do that from the command line every time you make that. So now it is actually time to move this to a GitHub action, which will actually do all the work for us. So when we do a new commit, it will start building that container and pushing it to the Azure Container Registry. And then later on, we will add a deployment pipeline that will pick it out of that Azure Container Registry and start deploying it in some Azure Container instances. So let's cancel this and continue to the GitHub action. So to make GitHub, good invention, the microphone. It's making even more noise here than me talking. So for GitHub Actions to be able to communicate with your Azure subscription, you need to create a service principal. And you have to copy that service principal and put it into the GitHub secrets. And then you can use that in your action to log in to the ACR or execute basically every Azure CLI command. So let's start with creating the service principal. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a service principal that only has access to a very specific resource group. You can create a service principal that's kind of like the owner of your wall subscription. That's like not a really good practice. You just want to limit the scope as much as possible and give like as less rights as possible as needed. Yeah, we will hear that more. So let's create the principal 01. So basically what it does, it's having here some information and then running an Azure CLI command here to get it, and then writes the output in authorization.json so I can copy it easily, and otherwise it shows an error. So basically all this information is in it. So let's actually get that information, go to GitHub, that's the wrong one. This one. You can find those secrets under settings, secrets. And now we just have to update these credentials. So this one goes in Azure credentials. And because we're going to use Azure GitHub Action, we're going to get all the connection strings and all the configuration from GitHub secrets. So we don't have to have any of these like kind of configuration files in the GitHub Action, because otherwise we have to check it into source control and nobody needs connection strings in source control. So now you have to bear with me and watch me copy and paste a few things. So I made a handy script to show me everything I had to copy. And that better works, yeah. So we need the ACI password because it's going to log in to the Azure Container Registry to push our image Docker container. Then we need, of course, the connection string from the database. Update that one. No spaces. Good. And we need our storage connection string. And the rest should be all right. So then the only thing we have to do is to create the GitHub action. And I will do that now. And what I will do is I will check everything in and kick off the GitHub action, and then I will go through what the GitHub action is going to do, because the GitHub action takes like 3 to 5 minutes to run, if we're lucky. So I'll go here, I will add everything that is here, and we say Umbraco together, we commit it, and then we push it. And now we should hope. Here we see it is starting up. It's cute. See, there is 2 stages, so I already have the deploy stage in here and the build stage. Looks like the YAML is valid and it is actually running. So let's hope that will do. So what is this GitHub action doing? So GitHub actions you put in GitHub workflows, and you just create a YAML file and you start typing. So what does this do? So every push on the branch, on the main branch, will kick off this workflow. So there are a lot of different things you can specify here, like development or other branches or other events. So the name is Umbraco 9 build and deploy. And here I have some environment variables to make it a little bit easier for me, like the image name, the storage account name, where the ACR actually is, my subscription. And these variables I can use later on all through my script. So I don't have to type all the time the name of the resource group. I can just update it and it will deploy everything here to a different resource group. Then the next thing you do is you start creating jobs. That's what you saw, build and deploy. So and every job consists of a series or a single step. And those steps uses like kind of actions, GitHub actions. So here I say, first step, check everything out. Then use this Azure Docker login container. Logs into my ACR with the credentials that it will pick from my secrets. And then it runs the commands we were actually doing also here on my command line, Docker build and Docker push. Then it is there in the ACR, and the next deployment step can kick in. So what I specified here is it needs build to be completed and finished. So you can also specify that it continues to the next step while another step or the job doesn't finish. But for me, this one really needs to be finished, otherwise it's kind of useless to deploy it. So what I do next, the first step is we log in to the Azure CLI with the service principal. We just copy paste it in. And then it is going to deploy it to an Azure container instance in Europe. Azure container instances are like kind of the easiest way to deploy a container. You point to a container, you give it some parameters, and it does it. It doesn't do more than that. You just give how much memory and how much CPU you want, which ports it at the open, and that's it. And you pass the connection strings in. So you can use environment variables and secure environment variables. So environment variables will show up in the Azure portal. This will just be star, 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 star. So now your secrets are really secret. On the other hand, you also just don't know if it actually was empty or had the correct thing. The second thing I do is I'm going to deploy it. I'm just going to check here if it's actually, yeah, perfect. Deploy it to East US. basically exactly the same. I just give it another name, but the same container with the same connection string with the same blob storage. And then I'm creating a traffic manager. So I have 2 containers up and running in 2 different regions, and I'm putting a traffic manager in front. So this traffic manager can, for me, decide to which container it is going to route the traffic. It can do that on geo-based, so everyone with a North American or an American IP address will go to the American one, and everyone who is closer to Europe will go to Europe. I can do it like round robin, like, oh, you go there, you go there, you go there, you go there, you go there. I can give priority, like try to everyone there, and there were a few more cases. You can make them nested. Like first you can do geo, and then you can do round robin to another cluster, so you can build like really cool structures with it. So I've done the most easiest thing. I just created a traffic manager profile. Again, a profile. And then I'm just adding 2 endpoints. The endpoint, I will call it the name of the container. Tell that it is an external endpoint. So Azure Container Instances are considered external endpoints and not like internal Azure things. Azure WebApps are. But Azure Container Instances are not. I'm using weighted, so now it should go round robin to America or to Europe. And then here I specify the names of the 2 containers, or the DNS names of the 2 containers, the URLs. So basically what it will do is every 10 seconds, it will check, hey, are you still up? 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 So we'll continue doing that every 10 seconds to this URL. And if that is still the case, it will remain active, and it will actively forward people to that. So what it does is in your browser, if you be routed to like one site, that will be your route. You actually have to go to incognito mode to reach another endpoint. So hopefully it is done. I see a small checkbox here. So it now has deployed those 2 containers. Azure Traffic Manager in front. So let's see in Azure if it actually done that. So we go here in my resource group. And we have 2 container instances with the GitHub. So we can click on one. And you can't do like that much. You can just check which containers are actually running. So luckily our container is running. So this is the container that is built. And it's in our Azure Container Registry. Here you see how it went. Pool. It was pooling, pooled, started. So sometimes if the container doesn't want to start, you get like a huge list from restarting, restarting, restarting. So you can connect to the logs to actually see what is going on. And this is super easy because you can just connect to your container. And let's scroll up. So now I'm in my container where Umbraco is running. And I can just see everything. I can check my app settings. I can read the log files, because that is actually one thing you still have to solve, is to get your log files out of the container. You can do that. There's a very big blog post on how to do that, but it takes a lot of work. But you definitely want to do that. Otherwise, when your container shuts down, all your logging is like gone. So this is what you can do. So let's see if the traffic manager is there. So here is our traffic manager. We see that we have 2 endpoints. They're both online, external endpoints. Here we see that it is like the name, weight is 1. We don't have any custom thing. So if we copy and paste this URL, we should be entering one of the 2 containers. And I have no idea what this one is, but and if we're really lucky, if I now open another browser, we get another host name. Nope, it is exactly the same. We could have tried it. So now we have this up and running, like a load balanced Umbraco environment in containers, developed in the browser, in GitHub code spaces. I could have done this on a tablet. And we have a CDN to make our media really fast and available everywhere. So this is what I wanted to demo you today. It actually works, so I'm happy. I also hope you enjoyed me typing and running scripts. It were a lot of scripts. So if you ever want to do this scenario, you can find it all on my GitHub, on the repository. It's now still on private because I have to make sure all my secrets are gone. And then in a few hours it will work and you can steal all my scripts and make them better. So thank you all for listening. And if there are questions, I will be around here the rest of the day, I think, because there is popcorn. Yeah.